Now that we have our objects UV mapped, let's go ahead and begin texturing them. To do that, I'm going to export a UV map out of Blender so that we can begin laying textures on it in Photoshop. So I'll select this building and take a look at its UV map here. And then I'm going to click on UVs and I'll go to Export UV Layout. In here I'll browse to my Textures folder and I'll export this out as 2048 by 2048. We should always export or create our textures at powers of 2. So I'll give this a more descriptive name here. I'll call this Building UVs and I'll export it out. Now I'll go into Adobe Photoshop and take a look at it. Here in Photoshop, I'll go to File, Open, and open up my Buildings UV PNG file. So here is the UV map exported out. It's got all the UV wires here, and it's got a little bit of shading on each of the islands so that we can put our textures underneath this layer and still see the UV maps. So I'll change the layer name to something like UVs. And let's bring in a few textures. Now, one of my favorite texture websites is cgtextures.com. And I've gone ahead and downloaded a few textures that we can use. Now, I can't provide these with the exercise files because of copyright, but you can always go to cgtextures.com, and even without a paid subscription, you can still download some wonderful textures from here. So the first thing I'll do is work on this building wall down here, and I've got a nice grungy concrete texture to use for it. So I'll go to File, Open, and open up this one here. And there it is. So this is the one I'm going to use for the wall of the building. So what I'll do is I'll press Control or Command A to select all, and then Control or Command C to copy. And then I'll move back over to the UVs document and press Control or Command V to paste that in. Now I'll come over to the Move tool, zoom out a bit with Control or Command minus, and I'll hold the Shift key down and scale this down a bit. Now I'd like to be able to see the UVs over this, so I'll press Enter to apply the transformation, and I'm going to drag this layer down beneath the UV so I can see the UV wires over that texture. So I'll bring this down and place this, and I'll believe I'll just get it lined up right about like this. Now I'd like it to repeat across here, so I'll press Alt and Shift and click and drag this over and line it up about like this, say. And then what I'd like to do is kind of clean up this seam a bit, so I'll turn the UVs off for just a moment, and I'll go to my Erase tool right here, and I've got the flow set fairly low and the opacity set, and I've got a brush that has a soft edge to it, and I'll come in here with the Erase tool and just erase some of that top one to blend it in with the previous image. Alright, so I have that. I'm going to press Control or Command 0 to zoom out again. And now that I've got this laid down the way I want it, I'm going to go ahead and combine these two layers. I'll select each of them and then press Control or Command E to collapse them together. And I'll call this Walls. Next up, let's work on the door here. These are the UV islands for the door. Let's bring in a wood texture for that. So I'll press File, Open, and let's bring in this wood planks texture. And there it is. Once again, I'll press Control or Command A, Control or Command C, and come back over here to the original document and press Control or Command V to paste that in. Now I'll go to my Move tool here, and I'll bring this over, and I think I need to reduce the size of this. These planks are very big right now in comparison to the size of the door. So I think I better scale this down a bit. So there we are. I've scaled the planks to size. So that's about how big these wood pieces would be on a door like that, I think. Now I'd like to clean this up so it isn't overlapping all the other UV islands. And a good way to do that is to come over to the UVs layer and come over here to the Magic Wand tool. And I'm going to click outside of this UV island and maybe shift click over here as well to make sure that everything around it is selected. And what I'd like to do is contract that selection a bit so it gives it a little bit of room all the way around the UV island. So I'll come up here and go to the Select menu and Modify and Contract, and I'll give it maybe 3 pixels here. So that expands that out just a bit. Now what I can do is select the layer where the wood is and just delete. And that deletes everything outside of that door. Now there are these other pieces, of course, but these are easy to get rid of by choosing our marquee tool here and going to the rectangular marquee and just drag selecting these areas and hitting delete. I need to deselect it first, so I'll press Control or Command D. And now I can drag select these pieces and just delete them out of there. I need to get the door frame now, so I'll zoom in there. And let's paste that wood planks in again with Control or Command V. And I'll scale this down just a bit again and line that up. And I'll clean that up again with the Marquee tool by pressing the M key and just dragging an area here and deleting this. And once again, I'll come back to the UVs layer and use that Magic Wand tool to select this area and maybe these areas here. I'll contract the selection again and switch to the layer with the door frame and then press delete. And that cleans it up a bit. We may have to do a little bit of extra work here. I'll go to the erase tool, increase this up to 100%, change to a brush with a hard edge, and can come in here and clean this up a bit. Now the UV islands for the door frame edges are along here, so I'll need to bring in that wood plank texture and lay it down over these as well. For these, I'll rotate it and try and line it up over here. I've also got a brass texture that I can lay down over the doorknob islands as well as the window frames. So let me bring that in. I'll go to File, Open, and let's bring in this bronze texture. I'll select all with Control or Command A and copy, and then bring this in here as well. I'll go to my Move tool, and let's start scaling this down to place over the appropriate islands. I can use the same trick with the UVs and the Magic Wand here. I'll select this area and shift select this area as well. And then I'll go to Select, Modify, and Contract. Contract this 3 pixels. And then I'll come over to the layer with the bronze on it and hit delete. Now with the brass and the wood laid down, I'll go ahead and combine these layers. So these 3 here are the brass for the doorknob and the window frames. So I'll press Control or Command E to collapse those and call that brass. And I'll select these 3, and these are the wood for the door. So I'll collapse those and call that door wood. just so I can keep track of what the layers are. Now these islands here are the actual window panes for the windows. So I've got a texture I can use for that. I'll go to File, Open, and bring in this window texture that I downloaded from CG Textures. For this, I'll change my marquee tool to an elliptical tool, and I'll press Shift and click and drag a circle out for the window. And I'll press Control or Command C, go back to my original document and paste this in. And now I can move this over and scale it to size. The last thing I need is the texture for the concrete rims and the tops of the buildings. So for this, I think I'll just grab a piece of this with the marquee tool. Maybe this piece right here. And copy that and go back to my main document and paste that in. Now I'll just scale this to size and just duplicate it with the Alt key and drag. The last thing I'll do is create a new layer here and drag this down to the bottom, and I'll call it background. And let's just make this a complete black background. So I'll choose black, and I'll go to the paint bucket tool and just click in an empty area. And before we export this out as our color map, we need to turn off the UVs here. Now at this point in time, we could do a little color grading here. I think the rims and the tops of the building is going to need to match the darkness of the top and the bottom of the walls a little better. So if I select the rims here, I can come up to Layer and create a new adjustment layer, and let's work with brightness and contrast. I'll select to only use the previous layer and click OK. And now I can adjust the brightness of just those pieces on that one layer. So I'm going to get them pretty dark to match the darkness of these here. I also think I want that bronze texture to be a little darker. I think it's a little too bright. So I'll select the brass layer, go to Layer, New Adjustment Layer, and I'll only use the previous layer, and I'll bring the brightness of this one down as well, so it's a little more aged. And from here, let's bring it back into Blender and see how it's going to look. So I'll go to File and Export, and I'll choose Export As. And in this window, I'll go ahead and choose a PNG. And then click Export. And put it in my Textures folder. Alright, let's head back to Blender and see how it looks. So in Blender, we're going to need to create a material for this texture to be applied to. Currently, this object has no material to it, so I'll click New, and I'll just call this Building. We then need to bring in an image node, so I'll click Add Texture, Image Texture. I'll link the color channel up to the color channel of the diffuse shader. Now I'll click Open, and let's browse to that Textures folder. And here it is. I named it building_COL. And there it is. So in the next video, we'll begin texturing the other pieces of the environment.